So, welcome to another podcast this week. I think this time we're probably going to avoid AI, but we'll see.
Yeah, I doubt it.
This week, I decided to bring up the topic of career pathing for an engineering type.
Yeah.
So, I used to be an engineer long time ago. Naveen still is largely an engineer, kind of.
I think of myself as one, but it's debatable whether I still am one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but for people on this journey, what is the path? And the reason I bring this up, and this discussion's good, is I've known Naveen for 7 years and have tried to instigate him down a bunch of different paths. So I think we might be able to share some experience of how those instigations go.
Yeah.
Right? But first, let's start with, what makes a good engineer? What do you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that actually. And I think for me anyway, and by the way, I think maybe it's worth the level set that, there's a lot of options out there. And I think you and I are both very opinionated, and I'm expecting to disagree on kind of our approaches to things, but there's lots of ways to succeed, and, everyone should define it themselves. So just want to start with that. But I think for me, engineering is a very personal and solitary thing. So for me, I got into engineering because I like math, I like science, I like working on things, I like getting really focused on a problem and working on it for a long time. And so I think an engineer tends to be that kind of person, someone who likes to have here's a little puzzle almost, and I'm going to just work on it for a while, and then it's going to be done. And then next puzzle, please.
Well, right? I think as a musician, I think of the things the same way, right? So I was like, I need focus, and I like my piece, which is my puzzle, and I need to figure it out, and I need solitude practice time. And there are group settings as well in which you perform and play. But I don't think that's tied to an engineering mindset. I think that's a focus and a discipline that I think is a skill that is applicable in many, many domains.
Fair. Okay, I'll give you that. The only reason I was saying really is because if that's true, as a general manager, one of the things you do is basically shake up people's focus constantly, right? It's like, why are you focused on? Go do more things.
Well, let's talk about that, right? Because when you start in engineering, right, there's people who want to specialize and go deep, like a specialist engineer.
That's right. And
then there's people that are generalist engineers. And I'm going to posit that not one is better than the other. They're just different, right? So there's a few people that might be dealing with, the levels of electron charges on physics chips and whatever. And Feng is a good example of that at Pure, right? He's a super deep, very deep specialist.
Yep.
And then you have a larger portion of the population that might be, I'm a C++ guy, I'm a Python guy, I'm a Java guy. Some either languages or domain spaces create cohorts.
Yeah.
Right.
By the way, I think that generalist concept, I'm not sure, but I think you see that a lot more in the software engineering world. So because we did say engineering in general,
fair.
Right? And so if you are not talking about nuclear engineering or aerospace engineering,
that's fair.
Right. I do think you are going to be more in that focused. I understand aerodynamics and nuclear physics and so on. Software engineering is an interesting beast.
Yeah.
And I know we said we're not going to talk about AI, but that's, I think, where we're going to get stuck again at some point. Software engineering has created this career path where you can learn how to code, which is kind of hackers, I can hack some software together. It can do some pretty incredible things. And I don't really need to know much other than basic automation. That's kind of what it is, right? And now there's different languages, there's different tool sets, there's different frameworks, and you have to just learn a lot of stuff, and you're a generalist, right?
Well, let me ask you this. Would you posit that computer science people aren't engineers?
Oh, so originally, at least in our school, computer science was a math discipline. And I think that the best computer scientists, in my opinion, tend to be more math-oriented. And mathematics, in my book, is not engineering. So,
we had two programs when I went to the same university. We had computer science in the engineering school, and computer science in the math and applied school, right? True. Bachelor's math, whatever, right? And the computer science engineering I had to take, ECE. I had to take, civics and building bridges. Like there was an engineering or embedded control system programming on IO on chips. Like I had to take more of that, but I did have to take,
I think we're dating ourselves because I don't think schools work that way now. But there used to be like the EECS side, which was like electrical engineering and computer science versus kind of more pure computer science.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that's more of a generalist thing. But I do want to come back to, I feel like in the engineers that I talk to and the people that at least work at Pure or even at other companies that I've worked at, the prototypical engineer likes to work by themselves.
Yeah.
And
I think that's uniform.
And that's kind of what I meant by the focus element. Like they just kind of want their problem to work on and they want to just go solve it. And they want to solve it. They want to be the best at solving that problem.
So now let's talk about how that translates to career pathing.
Yeah.
Right? Because typically what happens is, okay, we agree that they're a problem solver. Like that's a common vernacular. I'm good at solving problems. So you could solve those problems from a technical ladder standpoint, where you become an engineer and whatever. And a lot of companies say you can only get to a certain level as an engineer, and then you go into management. Because if you're good at solving problems, technical problems, you should be good at solving people problems.
Yep.
So why don't we promote you from this technical problem solver to a people problem solver?
You could engineer bits. Just engineer people. It's not that different, right?
Right. So what do you think about that?
I'm terrible idea. So obviously the two skills are completely not transferable. But I do think that the reason why maybe it's not as far of a leap as we might think is first of all, two things. One is not every company does have a ladder for pure engineering. And so that cutover to management happens a lot sooner at a lot of companies outside of the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
We live in the Bay Area. I think we've built a sort of corporate philosophy and culture that understands that, hey, these solo developers do have better impact over time.
Yeah, we have a career path at Pure all the way up to VP for an individual contributor engineer.
Right? So you don't ever have to make that cutover to managing people.
Yeah, that was distinguished fellows at IBM, I think, too, right?
Yeah. So Intel, where it was my formative days, we had fellows and senior fellows. And and these people are very impressive, right? Yeah. Now, I think the thing that's interesting is, I said we agreed engineers like to work on problems in solo. I mean, we live in a society where problems are so complicated. I mean, I don't know the last time I ever worked on something that I actually could solve it by myself. So you, by very nature of the thing you're working on, you need to start saying, well, I can only work on this part of the puzzle. But if the person working next to me doesn't do their part right, my part's irrelevant. And so you naturally start communicating with people, sometimes through code, but also just by going to a whiteboard together and saying, this is how we're going to solve the problem together.
So you're saying more like from an individual contributor engineer to make the next level in your leader, like on the individual contributor path, is to have a wider context of multiple problem areas that involve collaborating with other people.
And I think it happens naturally, almost accidentally for most engineers. So, because the other thing I was going to talk about is my career path has been, I do go after opportunities when I see them, but I haven't strategically planned where I ended up, right?
And same for me, right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But I didn't expect you to say that.
Yeah.
I think of you as like playing a chess game like 10 years out in advance.
I never really did that with career for some reason. It just kind of happened.
Wow.
So, which is, and I'm not saying that's my career advice, is just wait for things to happen, but
it's mind-blowing. My worldview of you has somehow been like, that's going to be a whole follow-up conversation. But I guess what I was trying to say is that as part of being an engineer and trying to solve just the problems you're working on and solve bigger and bigger problems, because that's what you like to do, you have to work with your peers. You have to collaborate with your peers. You have to argue with your peers. And you almost naturally just start learning to work with people.
And if you do that really well, don't you just become a manager?
And this is where you and I have gotten into it before. For anyone who knows, Prakash has been trying to get me to be a people manager. Actually, I think you gave up at this
No, I actually, we actually had someone leave and made him do it interim for a little while, right? I do think I made you do a performance cycle.
You did, yes.
At one point, hesitantly, I think.
I did it mainly to try it out because we'd been arguing about it so much.
Yeah.
I think the difference is that an engineer collaborates with their peers to solve a problem. And I almost could predict what you're going to say here, but to me, people management is growing individuals that report to you. You are worried about the problem, but you are almost more worried about the effectiveness and the cohesiveness of the people that work for you, and how to make the team function better as a whole. And so it's a bit more of an external. You're almost trying to externalize the things you're trying to do. It's like, these are the people that need to go do the work, right?
Well, let's go down two different paths. So you've got a management path and you've got the senior engineer path, right?
Yep.
So before we deviate too far down the management path, let's continue the thread of the individual contributor up the ladder path. So you said, okay, you're working a technical problem, you collaborate, it's a bigger technical problem, you're now a second line engineer. Well, what's a third line engineer?
Yeah, and that's where it starts getting like weirder and weirder. What you'll find, and I think a healthy engineering organization is, now let's say you've solved your piece of the puzzle. So in flash storage, this might be like garbage collection. There's a piece of the software that has to make sure flash is available to be written to. It's fairly complicated. It requires a team. Mm-hmm. And you might have to collaborate with that team on how to build it. Well, now you might want to be increasing the performance of the array as a whole. So the problem you're trying to go after is a amalgamation of many components. Mm-hmm. What you're now doing is working not with the other individual engineers that are coding those components. You're going to work with their leads. And so now you're collaborating with other leads. Mm-hmm. None of you is really coding day to day, or you're coding way less than someone.
So you're saying now you're an architect, or
you're getting closer. Architect? You're getting closer to that. Like, to me, by the way, for anyone who knows me, like, I hate the word architect. It's like because I think you're right. It's just a spectrum. Yeah. You're a solo coder versus you're this, you're a collaborative problem solver, right? And as you start moving further and further to the right, you spend more time at whiteboards, in documents, and so on with other people who are working on other components. And then you might go even further. You might be, okay, now I want to think about the hardware that my software is running on. Now I've gotten even further, and I might be working with the lead of the leads of the engineers and collaborating, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I kind of look at that as home building, right? In home building, you have an architect that will design a home. They might not be the one you want operating the drill, right? And usually, like, you need to understand some things. There's like engineers, load balancing, civics, geology. There's a lot of engineering disciplines in home building, right? Where the architect will collaborate with the geology guy and the load physics person and the electrical and whatever, but they're putting it together and operate in document format.
100%.
Right? And then you choose a builder, and that builder specializes in, the efficiency of delivery thereof.
Actually, I actually use home construction a lot as an analogy for engineering, because I think most people understand it, and also I think it works pretty well. I think a major difference between how modern software engineering works in home building is the following. In a home, when you're building it, there'll be people who do carpentry. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do the framing, and maybe there's even subspecialties like the flooring. I'm going to have my electrician. I'm going to have my plumbing. And all of these are subcontractors who do their thing, and they come in, and someone has to organize that they do their job at the right time.
Is that management, or is that architect?
I think that's management.
Yeah.
And that's why it's the general contractor, to me, is very similar to a general manager, in my opinion, to some extent.
Yeah. So let's.
But just one thing I want to finish off there, which is, in a true software engineering discipline, all of those people are a lot more fungible. So I, as a carpenter engineer, might be like, well, electrical's falling behind right now. I know a little bit of electrical. I could go do some of this for you guys while you, like, to get you caught back up, right?
Yeah.
And I know that's the critical path of the project. And by the way you're doing your electrical makes what I'm doing in doing framing more complicated. Could you do it this other way? And so there's this more collaborative.
Well, and I would argue, yes, at healthy engineering cultures.
Yes.
Meaning, I think Pure does a good job of operating that way, where it's like, okay, let's hire more, generalist engineers that can play multiple different roles,
Yep.
right? I think that's built into our sourcing and our recruiting process.
It is.
Right? Versus saying, I have a flooring job open, right? Let me hire a floorer who can't ever do electrical.
Actually, originally, and I think we still do this, we would look for people who are world-class floorers that could function as generalists. And you actually kind of get this weird best of both worlds. They understand how to go deep. They know what going deep means, but they also can work sideways.
Yeah.
So,
no, and I do think that creates a healthy path, because then you have a path where you can evolve to solve more and more. Like, I know you talked about the collaboration angle. I think about the individual, because I went down becoming a more senior engineer before I left and went to product and management and whatever. But it's complexity. It's not just collaborate. There's two vectors. There's who do I go to for more complicated things?
True.
More senior people.
Yeah.
Right? And who do I go to for more collaborative things? Also more senior people, right? On the individual, and then the third element is expertise.
Yeah.
Right? So, and who do I go to for complex and collaborative elements? Ideally, if they were an expert in that area, that would be great. This is the domain experience we talk about.
Right.
Remember when we were like, Naveen, what do you know about master data management? Right? That was a topic that you weren't a domain expert in at one point.
Yes.
You
and
now
still,
are, kind of.
Kind of, yeah.
So, I think domains can be learned.
Yeah.
Right? And some people hire for domains. I actually don't think that's necessarily healthy in the engineering culture domain. Right? Now, maybe in core nuclear physics engineering, sure.
Right.
But like in software engineering.
Totally, yeah. But by the way, there's a weird aspect to that, which I think is also talking about, again, healthy engineering organizations, because, there's dysfunctional ones.
Yeah.
A senior engineering leader, in my opinion, is always aware that the next leader could be anywhere. And so it is the case that senior leaders in the company will come to senior engineering leaders and say, hey, here's a big problem that needs to be solved. A good, this is the individual contributor path. A good individual contributor engineer will then say, I, first of all, don't know how to solve that problem. And second of all, I could go to the normal cohort of people who can solve problems randomly. But there's also these other people who've been here for only a couple of years and they're showing a lot of promise. Let's start throwing problems their way. Let's grow the group.
You absolutely have to grow. And that's where, my management philosophy is interesting, because as a GM, I always constantly state that if I solve a problem, I'm stealing a learning opportunity for another.
Exactly.
So I view my job as a GM to be chief problem creator, not solver.
Yes. And I think good technical leaders think the same way.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that then does start to show a lot more of those people management traits. Like I definitely see that, because I lied, right? I'm like, an engineer is very solo and thinking about themselves, but then there's this weird trait where you're externalizing growth of the group.
Yeah.
And so that definitely is an aspect.
Yeah, and I think good leadership is defined by creating a healthy operating environment where new people can grow.
Yes. Exactly.
And that's true on both sides.
That's right. And humility, right? So, I mean, that's another thing that's going to be a common trait, which is if you can't recognize that you don't know how to solve the problem, then you're probably just going to fumble your way through something and fake it, and it's not going to work. You're better off just recognizing, like, hey, there's problems you don't know how to solve, and do you need to be the one to learn how to do it, or is the organization something that needs to be able to learn how to do it?
100%. Now let's talk about management. So I'm going to put out a thesis, because I've kind of built a strong management philosophy in both engineering and then now product management and general management, right? In engineering, I was like, okay, I viewed myself as not a humble individual contributor engineer at one point.
Yep.
I was like, I think management's evil and I just want to code, right? Like I started my career at that end of the extreme. And
like any good engineer, management is evil, right?
Yeah, I turned down my first management promotion, right? I was like, well, look, I can just outcode 10 people. And then eventually I was like, well, I can't outcode 50, right? So then I was like, fine, I don't want, I kind of did it as a reservation because I just don't want someone managing me who's I kind of found myself like, okay, fine, I can manage this team, right? And then I was like, well, my job as a first line manager in engineering is to ensure efficiency and like productiveness of all the people working for me, right? It's like their growth, their productivity, it's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And then I eventually became a second line manager. And I realized that at a second line manager, the first line manager was worried about the productivity of his teams.
Okay.
And my team kind of got along. So I was like, what is this job? Because I didn't need to really manage my first line manager.
Interesting.
So my view as a second line manager in a healthy organization where I'm not just dealing with interpersonal team conflict of people is to ensure my KPIs are the success of my peers. So crucial to a successful engineering system is second line managers get judged by the success of their peers, not by the success of the productivity of what's in their domain space.
Okay, well, that is totally surprising to me, and I'm kind of shocked that I've never realized this. I don't even understand what that means.
So when I'm doing performance ratings,
Okay.
first line manager, how good is your team?
Yep.
Second line manager, how well are you making your peers successful?
When you say peers, like your
Your
peers,
interfaces side by side.
your peers,
Other second line managers, right? So like when you're building a healthy engineering system in management, and then the director, what's his job? Is progressive overload and oversign, right? Meaning there's an engineering efficiency unit rate. Maybe it's number of code lines per engineer, which is a bad metric. Don't use that,
don't.
right? Because never do that. A lot of reasons why. But let's say you have next year for the same headcount, should you get 10% more? Yes, you should get 10% more because people are smarter if you're doing so. The director's there to overassign work because you're creating problems for people to solve.
It's putting tension in the system.
Well, when you want to build muscle, you tear muscle.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
how your human body works. The brain works the same way. Organizations work the same way.
And that seems intuitive to me. The peer thing is still blowing my mind. So why? I'm just trying to even understand how to ask the question. Let's say a second level manager wasn't focused on their peers.
What happens in an 200, 300, 1,000 person engineering team? In middle management, a lot of things break down, right, in engineering systems. And it's always about me, my team, my project, whatever.
Interesting.
So you need in the middle of the engineering system to measure and incent the success of your peers, not your team. Because the first line managers are already ensuring project success.
Interesting. So is this sort of the analog of in the engineering tech ladder, the higher you go, you're trying to grow laterally. You're trying to say, hey, the whole organization needs to get healthier and work together because we all have to function together. Is that kind of the philosophical equivalent? Which your team is not successful if your peer team is not successful.
Well, look, one way that I talk about building architects on the individual contributor ladder is rotations.
Yes.
And part of it is like, you know more of the code base, you know more of the thing, you're broadening your context when you're broadening your mind.
Yep.
Engineering managers in unhealthy organizations think about the number of people working for me, right? Like, it's like, oh, how do you become a VP of engineering? You collect the most bodies.
Yep.
That is very unhealthy.
Yep.
There are groups at Pure that think like that too, by the way.
Yeah, that's everywhere.
That's an unhealthy view from my lens,
Granted.
right? And I believe that at the second line manager, if you set it up where they're ensuring success of peer groups, the one way of doing that is also rotating, like you do to broaden your context windows, to broaden empathy of other teams.
Yep.
Right? But a project, as you said earlier, as it gets more complicated, has to cross multiple teams.
Yep.
And you will create, if the incentive system is my team down, you don't know that you're a bottleneck on other teams because of the way you're measured. So as long as you're measured on ensuring you're, at the second line manager, not bottlenecking other teams, you're maximizing the efficiency of the organization.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Right? And then the director applying progressive overload. And then what does a VP do? Ideally, the VP provides progressive overload on challenges to the directors the VP links it to goals and business outcomes and all of that jazz as an engineering manager.
Right.
And interpersonal conflicts tend to exist as the system gets larger. Politics, ego, motivation, like all of those things happen. So I view that VPs of engineering, of large engineering organizations, because I had 3,000 at one point, right? Large engineering organizations become largely either solving psychological or sociological problems of individuals, assuming the other things are there. Otherwise, you're doing someone else's job.
Right.
Right? And then eventually, the GM should just sit back and do nothing, right? No, I'm joking. Well, kind of, right? But then what does the GM do from a management standpoint, right? So in an ideal world, everything's working. Generally, we know we never get to the ideal, and the GM's there to go ahead and fill the gaps and step in where necessary. So I think what makes good GMs are people who've gone down both management ladders and technical ladders. And, there's two types of people. There's people who are like, I'm going to lead for things I've never done.
Right.
So I might be deep in one area, but I've got blind spots in others, and I'm using other people to fill in those blind spots. I prefer being like, no, wherever it is, if it's an engineering problem, product management, sales, whatever, I've cultivated a career going down diverse paths. I've had an AE quota.
Yep.
I've been an engineer. I've
This
been a
is why
product
I'm
manager.
calling a little bit of BS on your previous comment of like you feel like you haven't planned your journey.
Well, I didn't plan it. It all happened to me. So I'm self-rationalizing a good GM in retrospect of things that have just happened to me. It was not planned.
Okay.
Right?
Because maybe we can qualify it this way. So one of the things that I did when I joined Pure was, I think we talked about it before. My background is in CPU architecture, which is a very deep field. To even kind of get your entry level position, you have to get a PhD. It's just the way the industry works.
Yeah.
So I'd gone very deep, and then decided I didn't want to do that job anymore. So I was like, okay, now I have a lot of specialty that is useless. Mm-hmm. And so when I joined Pure, I was like, hey, I don't really understand software engineering. I'm happy to work for you guys, but I'd like to move regularly. And the way for me to learn was to just kind of learn different parts of software engineering.
And that was intentional for me.
And that was
too.
intentional.
I was open to it. It's just the timeline of the moves happened to be someone asking. I just never, okay, I'm done with this. Let me go to the next one.
Fair
You know what I mean?
Okay, so there was intention in saying like you did want to
I was
broaden your...
open to the broad perspective versus narrow perspective.
Perfect, yeah. And by the way, I do think that that's, unless you're the type of individual who really wants to do one thing really, really, really deep, I think that's just, like for me anyway, that's been the one thing that I always share with people is like, just try other things. Like always do it. Make yourself uncomfortable. Always make sure you're learning. Like whether you're doing engineering or management, I think you and I, at least from what I see of you, I think we're always trying to do things that are new and different and challenging our minds.
Yeah, well, and so I know you said AI is going to come into software engineering. So what does AI mean for this?
So that was what I was referring to in the software engineering for generalists kind of view. I think the generalist in the software engineering world deals with a couple things. One is there's a lot of languages out there. There's a lot of frameworks. And you have to learn a lot of really nuanced things that change over time, like in Java. How does Spring Boot work in Java to make a web server, right? Like it's not the mechanics of building a web server. It's how does it work in this language with this framework? AI, I think, makes that go away entirely. So I think it means that in the software engineering discipline, you're going to spend a lot more time problem solving versus problem fitting. Maybe I don't know if that's the right word, but how do I solve the problem in this language that these weirdos decided to use here? And I think AI is already has completely changed the game there. Like you don't need to know frameworks anymore. You just ask AI, I want to make an API call to Datadog to do the following. And it'll be like, here, you just do this. Be like, cool, that looks right, and use it, right? So I think that people are going to work on deeper problems.
Well, and I think, I tend to agree with you, right, in that change, but said differently, when we come back to our college analogy of programs saying there's the engineering computer science domain and then there's the just general programming computer science domain, right? If we separate out the two domains, this person's programming, this one knows actually how the computer works.
Exactly.
Right? I believe that right now, a bulk of what we produce in colleges, education systems, computer science programs, et cetera, are programmers, not engineers.
100%.
And if you're a programmer or you're thinking about going into computer science as a programming discipline, AI is going to eat your lunch.
It is.
Because, and I've had a lot of peers that are like, my kid wants to go into computer science. Should they still because of AI? And I'm like, okay, first let's separate out what, if they've got a curiosity of solving large, complex problems, and engineering education is very good.
Yep.
Right? If they're, I think I'm going to make a big lot of money by doing a lot of little menial work by writing some cheap programs, that's not the right reason to be in the discipline.
Yep.
Because it's a supply-demand equation, and AI is going to eat their lunch.
And I may get flack for this, but another way to characterize this is if you want to be an app developer, that's a dangerous place to be right now. Andrew Karpathy actually just did a video. There's this new term called vibe coding. So, and you can over the weekend just use some of the code generation tools out there with Claude or whatever, and you could literally just start from scratch and create a fully functioning app in a weekend.
Yeah, Bolt.new doesn't even create the app. It actually publishes the app and scales the app and does the SRE.
Exactly, and you didn't code any of it.
100%.
You just told it what you wanted, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that programmer discipline that AI is just eating up.
Well, but I'm going to take umbrage with one thing because I started as an application developer.
Sorry, when I say app, I mean like phone app. I don't mean like application.
Yeah, so look. When I started playing with some of these AI tools, right, I went to, and I experiment with some. I'm like, write me an application and push it to my iOS for me doing sit-ups, and I can hit record on my phone camera and show me where my posture is wrong.
It's awesome.
And publish it, right? And it did that, right? So anything that one engineer right now could do in a few minutes, it did. Full deployment, everything, no coding knowledge, all English, right? But it's not today at the place where something that 5 engineers could have done in a year, right? It's but that bar is going to move as AI gets more sophisticated, and it'll be able to do more complicated things.
Yep.
So either, all it's going to do is thin out the middle. At the top, when you write an application, knowing what to ask, what accounting principle do I want to solve for requires domain knowledge. Understand a domain, understand nutrition, understand biology, understand chemistry, because technology will become more easily accessible to write a program in the chemistry lab to say, I need a program that will titrate blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? If you need to know what question to ask, which puts a premium on a skill set from a functional domain.
100%. Now, no, actually, maybe I agree with all of that. Maybe to flip the conversation, and maybe as a closing kind of topic, what about for management? Do you think AI is going to change what it means to be a people manager?
Well, so let's go back to my definitions of management. First line management, efficiency of individuals. Mm-hmm. Second line management, efficiency of peers, right? Directors, progressive overload, right? General manager, VPs, social and psychological, right? Generally, and general managers, all of the above, generally, right? So let's play out what AI discipline means in each one of those functions. AI for a first-line manager will thin out a lot of the work of tracking, Jiras, how do you go ahead and work together? Yeah, I think 80% of a first-line manager's task will get efficient, but I don't think it's a complete AI hands-off thing because there are people.
Agreed.
Now, there will eventually be agent engineers that are not people managed by fake first-line managers, right? So there was, my wife sent me this article today, which I forwarded you.
So bizarre.
Saying AI right now, because it's trained by human behavior, when you're asking angry questions, it becomes angry and responds angrily. When you ask sarcastically, it responds back sarcastically.
Yep.
But because of human society, it's developing anxiety, and now they're training it on mindfulness. Like, this is legit happening right now in ChatGPT, right? You're actually having AI therapists for how AI is, because of the prompts from mentally challenged people, like, or not well-developed human beings, on how they're communicating with AI is messing up AI.
I'm going to have my
right?
next check. I'm going to tell it, let's both take a 5-minute mindfulness break and see what happens. I'm curious.
Yeah, but like, so that's legit happening. So I think, for what I would consider AI-generated engineers, you'll have AI-generated managers, and for humans, it'll make your life easier, right?
Yeah.
Second-line management around peer collaboration, I think, is hard. Like, I think that, and that we can go back to our AI love kind of relationship, like, because that's applicable.
Interesting.
All the things we decided in terms of, could it enhance relationships or could it hurt relationships in our AI for Love podcast,
right,
are applicable in the second line manager and replace love with engineering peer relationship.
Right.
I view that as similarly applicable. Will AI be good at identifying progressive overload? It's a harder problem.
That's hard, yeah.
Right? So I'd say longer horizon before it kind of hits the director thing. VP psychological and sociological.
Yeah, it doesn't seem.
Like, you know what? Right now I do a lot of psychological, sociological research studies, and AI has made me more efficient in terms of digesting research faster.
Sure.
So I've become more efficient in identifying behavioral traits, sociological experiments, digesting large amounts of social studies, right? Socioeconomic studies. Like, for example, in the current Trump political environment, there's a large portion of people that believe it's chaos in the government. And actually, if you ask questions to identify, my friend Reuven Gersh, figured out, is there a pattern to the trade tariff negotiation? And AI can identify patterns I didn't see to say, oh, there's a method in the madness.
Interesting.
Right? So I think as a organizational diagnostic tool, AI is great for the VPs.
Sure.
Right? But they'll still have to do it, and it becomes, you need to know what to ask.
I think it makes you better is what you're saying, but I don't think that's not a replacement thing, right?
Yeah, well, and then as a general manager, and I think this comes back to, are you responsible for what you create? Because let's say technology is not the barrier. Do you have an ethical and moral responsibility, last podcast,
Yep.
of what you create? As a general manager, this is my group. This is the thing I'm creating. And if I think about, where AI comes into that, it becomes having neurodiversity in domains that makes me a good general manager. So it'll change good general managers in the future, to have a wider multidisciplinary contexts, right? So whether you're saying, I'm building a larger context window from an engineering domain, code base, whatever,
Yep.
or you're building on the management layer, either a larger application, domain, career, it all comes down to neurodiversity and depth of multiple domains, domain spaces or people spaces over time.
And maybe you're saying you can go shallower and have more context more quickly.
And I think, you just rank it in terms of people's potential.
Yeah.
The highest potential people can go both shallow and wide.
Exactly, yeah.
Or, deep and wide.
Yeah.
Right? So depending on your potential, how big is your context window? This is the question, are we all just AI? We have a bigger context window, right?
Exactly.
We're more intelligent than artificial, right? So I think we'll wrap it there today. But final word for you.
I think the thing, actually, just knowing you for a while, I think the thing that I at least will summarize that is, regardless of what path you go down, is curiosity. I think whatever you choose, if it keeps you curious and it keeps you learning and it keeps you just kind of constantly growing, that's a good choice for you.
Yeah, I agree with that. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.